السلام عليكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. I love this dua, the one that I start with, because I love the meaning, and because it was the dua of Musa alayhi salam. When Musa was told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to go speak to Fir'aun, what he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for was this: رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي وَاحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِّن لِسَانِي يَفْقَهُوا قَوْلِي. He's asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to expand his chest and to make his matters easy. We have this idea that only those people who have a deficiency in Iman ever get constriction of chest. We have this idea that only if you have low Iman or far away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will you ever feel sadness. But we know from the examples that even the prophets, peace be upon them, had these feelings. It is human to feel sadness. It is human to feel sometimes constriction of chest. It's human to feel afraid sometimes and sad sometimes. And in fact, everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, every emotion that He's created, every occurrence in our life has a purpose. I think the problem is that we live in a society where as soon as you feel anything less than complete bliss, you just are told to pop a pill, because you're never ever supposed to feel sad, and you're never ever supposed to feel any sort of pain whatsoever. You're just supposed to always be happy, as if that was possible, as if this life was Jannah and not dunya, and it isn't. So the question we have to ask is, well, what is the purpose of pain? What is the purpose of sadness? And what are we supposed to be, what is normal, and then when does it become abnormal? When does it become something that we're supposed to avoid? When we look at the purpose of sadness or the purpose of pain, let me give you an example that is like a physical example. This is actually a true story. There was a man, and it was like an article written about it in the news. There was a man who, he had pain in his tooth. So he had this, if you know anything about, may Allah protect you, tooth pain, it's excruciating. So he went to the dentist, but he didn't have insurance. And, we live in a country that doesn't have universal health insurance, so he didn't have insurance. And he could not afford he only could afford one of the medications. He could either afford to get the painkiller, or he could afford to get the antibiotic to treat his infection. So the pain led him to go to the doctor. He went to the doctor and he found out that he had an infection. But when he got there, he realized, okay, he has to choose. He can either choose the painkiller or he can choose the antibiotic. So what do you think he chose? Well, he chose the painkiller, because he immediately, he didn't want to feel the pain anymore. Well, what ended up happening is the infection spread until it reached his brain, and he ended up dying of the infection. So what's the moral of this story? First, the pain was an indicator that there was a problem. The pain is what actually drove him to go seek help and then to go seek treatment. But he just wanted to numb the pain. He just didn't want to feel it anymore. As a result, he didn't actually cure the problem. And this is how we live, is that when we feel some sort of pain or sadness, instead of looking at the reason why it's there, because it is a pointer, it is in there to show us that there is something we need to change sometimes. Maybe we need to change a situation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Indeed, Allah does not change the condition of a people. So the external condition of a people does not change until they change what is inside themselves. So if we are in a situation that we don't like, if we're in a situation that's causing, grief, it may be an indication that we need to change something inside. And And I'm going to talk about briefly what that could be that we need to change inside. But before I get there, I want to really, emphasize the moral of the story. And that is that when we're just trying to numb these negative, just any kind of non-pleasant feeling, we numb it. Instead of treating it, it can lead to, a spiritual death. Instead, what we need to do, so what this man should have done is he should have gotten the antibiotic. He should have treated the problem instead of just trying to numb it. So how does that relate to sadness, or how does this relate to the problems that we face internally? And a lot of times people are suffering in silence. They have a problem, they're facing something inside, and they keep it all inside. But what is it that causes this? First, I need to make a distinction between human sadness. It's human to feel sad sometimes. And I'll give you many examples of this from the stories of the prophets themselves, peace be upon him. But there's a difference between sadness and devastation and depression and hopelessness and despair. It's human to feel sad. It is what we want to avoid and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us those tools, is to avoid devastation, to avoid despair, and to avoid hopelessness. But what is the difference here? What I would say is this. When we have something that causes us devastation, so now we're talking about complete, like I'm unable to function. A lot of times, and this is, again, not talking about sort of medical or sort of like chemical, sometimes there are definite biological reasons for this. But putting that aside, one of the situational causes or one of the spiritual causes of devastation, where it paralyzes you, is false attachments. What I mean by that is when I attach myself and I become completely dependent upon anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when that thing disappoints me or when that thing doesn't work out, as will happen, because everything in the world except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is breakable. Everything passes away. Everything is limited except Allah. If I put all my dependence, if I give my entire heart to something other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what happens is I will be disappointed again and again and again. And sometimes when we love things, whether it's people, or it's our jobs, or it's our money, or it's our fancy houses or fancy cars, when we love something as we should only love Allah, it will cause devastation. I'm going to repeat that because it's very important. When we love something as we should only love Allah, no matter what it is, again, if it's your job, or even if it's a family member, or it's money, or it's status, if we love something as we should only love Allah, it will cause devastation. So sometimes this devastation, when we feel it, it's an indication that there is not a proper balance in my heart. That I love something else, or I'm dependent on something else as I should only love and be dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me give you guys a practical example. The stock market crashes. You know of stories that when the stock market crashes, somebody loses all their money. They don't find any more reason to exist, and they commit suicide. Why does that happen? Why does something like that happen? This is a real thing. Someone breaks up, someone's boyfriend or girlfriend or wife or husband breaks up with them. They kill themselves. Why does that happen? I mean, these are extreme examples, but we have to look at why does that happen. The reason that happens is because that person took something other than Allah and made it and gave it a position in the heart that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should have. When that thing was taken away, it caused absolute devastation. Now that's an extreme example where it leads to suicide, but I'm giving that example so we can see that this is the extreme end of this. But there is something more common than that, and that is this debilitating sadness or debilitating anxiety. And when you look at it, and I'll tell you, this is an exercise that everybody can do for themselves. If you ask yourself, what is the cause of my greatest sadness? What is the cause of my greatest anxiety? When you ask yourself these questions, what is it that I think about most? What is it that distracts me most in my prayers? When you think about the answers to these questions, it will point you to the direction of those things which we love in a way we should not. It will point you to the direction of those things that may be competing with Allah in our hearts. And ironically, those very things become the source of our greatest sadness and our greatest anxiety. The one who loves his job so much that that's all that's on his mind, or on her mind, the one who loves money, that's also going to be the cause of his greatest or her greatest anxiety and sadness as well. Always worrying. If something doesn't work out, always sad. Now I'm going to give you guys an example that we don't usually hear, and that's when it's another person. And it's usually the case with us women that our biggest sort of competitor in terms of these attachments, it's usually other people. It's usually family members, sometimes it's our spouse, sometimes it's our children. You will find that when you have this imbalance in your heart in terms of what you love, that very thing will be the cause of your greatest sadness and your greatest anxiety. So then what's the solution? The solution is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, Allah says, وَلَا تَدْعُ مَعَ اللَّهِ إِلَهًا آخَرَ فَتَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُعَذَّبِينَ. This ayah means, do not call on an ilah other than Allah, or you will be among the tormented. What does it mean to call on an ilah other than Allah? A lot of times people think that calling on an ilah means that I'm praying to something. But when you look at the root word, and you look at the meaning of the word ilah, and you break it down by letters, you find that ilah doesn't just mean something you pray to. And ilah is also a shelter. And ilah is an ultimate source of, it's basically your ultimate source of shelter, comfort. And it's basically what you revolve your entire existence around. So what is this ayah telling us? That yes, if you pray to something other than Allah, you will be among the tormented. But if you take something and you take that and you put it in a place in your heart where only Allah should be, you will also be among the tormented. That very thing becomes the cause of your greatest pain. So the answer then is in the concept of Tawheed at its very root, and that is La ilaha illallah. There is nothing else that should have that place in my heart except Allah. And this concept of loving for the sake of Allah then means that everything else I love, it's because of Allah, and it's for Allah, and it brings me closer to Allah. When you do that, and you're able to do that, this idea of hopelessness and devastation, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you think about it like this, if you're climbing, suppose you're climbing a cliff, and you need to hold on to something while you're climbing. You can either choose to hold on to something sturdy, like a sturdy rope, or say you decide to hold on to a twig. What happens to the one who holds on to a twig? It breaks. And then what happens to you? You fall. Now, is that the twig's fault? It's not the twig's fault. That twig was not created to hold your weight. You can't put your full dependence on a twig and then get mad that it broke. Anytime we put our full dependence on another person, on our job, on our money, on our status, it's going to break by definition. And it's when it breaks that we fall and we break, and that's devastation. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ اسْتَمْسَكَ بِالْعُرْوَةِ الْوُثْقَى لَا انْفِصَامَ لَهَا. the one who believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has held on to the trustworthy handhold that never breaks. That's the only handhold that never breaks. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم سبحانك الله وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.